They began as childhood friends, and ended as sworn enemies. In 1953, two young boys stood side by side at a school talent show in Queens, innocent, hopeful, and unaware of the music empire they'd one day build together. By the 1970s, they were legends. The world called them the greatest duo in music history. But behind the flawless harmonies was a silence louder than any applause. One of them said something so personal, so unforgivable, it tore their bond apart. They performed together, but never spoke backstage. One secretly recorded 30 solo tracks, the other wiped vocals in revenge. In 2015, the truth exploded when one publicly called the other a monster. What happened next ended decades of friendship, for good. This is not just the story of Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel. This is the story of how fame, ego, and betrayal destroyed a brotherhood. His father, Louis, lived two lives. By day, he was a quiet college professor. By night, he transformed into Lee Sims, a bass player swinging through smoky dance halls. Their home pulsed with contrast, books stacked high beside vinyl records, tradition wrapped in rhythm. Paul Simon grew up in that collision of worlds, where structure met soul. His mother, Belle, took him to synagogue to nurture his roots, while Louis took him to Yankee Stadium to chase American legends. For Paul, watching Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio wasn't just a pastime, it was about heroes, identity, and belonging. Years later, he'd immortalized DiMaggio in Mrs. Robinson, proving those childhood moments never left him. In 1945, when Paul was just 4 years old, the family moved to Queens, specifically to a neighborhood called Kew Gardens Hills. That move didn't just mean a new address, it was a gateway into a different universe. Late into the night, Paul would watch in awe as his father appeared on TV shows like The Jackie Gleason Show and Arthur Godfrey and His Friends, slipping seamlessly between the roles of teacher and performer. That duality left a deep impression. Paul began to understand, music wasn't just background noise. It was transformation. It was identity. It was power. It wasn't just music, it was identity, expression, and the beginning of a lifelong purpose. In their Queens neighborhood, surrounded by Jewish families who cherished both culture and education, Paul Simon absorbed everything like a sponge. Jazz filled his ears. Woody Guthrie stirred his curiosity. The raw, aching soul of Lead Belly's blues gripped his young heart. Music wasn't just entertainment, it was a lens through which he started to understand the world. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1953, at just 11 years old, Paul sat in the audience of a school talent show at PS 164. That's when he saw a boy his own age, Art Garfunkel, take the stage alone and sing. A girl next to Paul whispered how good he was, and just like that, something clicked. It wasn't only the music that drew Paul in, it was the reaction. He suddenly saw singing not just as an art, but as a way to connect, to impress, to matter. Later that same year, fate stepped in again. Both boys were cast in their 6th grade production of Alice in Wonderland. On the surface, it was just a school play. But when their voices came together, something electric happened. It was natural. Effortless. Like destiny. They soon formed a doo-wop group called the Peptones, performing at school dances and block parties, already chasing a dream most kids their age hadn't even imagined. By the time Paul was just 13, he had written their first original song. The empire had begun, and neither of them knew just how high it would rise, or how far it would eventually fall. By age 15, they were more than just friends. They were musicians who made records. In 1957, they released the song, Hey Schoolgirl, under the names Tom and Jerry. It was based on their love of the Everly Brothers. As they tried to remember the words to Hey Doll Baby, they wrote it by chance. To make a demo, they scraped together $25. In 1957, that was a lot for kids, but it worked. Sid Prowan, the promoter, heard them and signed them. Jerry Landis changed Paul's name. Art changed his name to Tom Graff. It got to number 49 on the Billboard lists. More than 100,000 units were sold. They were even on American Bandstand. At age 15, they were well known. But beneath the surface, things were getting worse. Paul did more than just sing back then. When he was 12 or 13, he wrote their first song, "The Girl for Me." The words and chords were even written down by his dad. That piece of paper is now in the Library of Congress. Art had a better voice. Paul had the pen and the drive to do well. It was always going to be unfair for Paul to make art an act, and things were only going to get worse. From 1957 to 1964, Paul had a secret music life. He made more than 30 songs under fake names while still working with Art. There is True Taylor, Jerry Landis, and Paul Kane. He did work for Amy, Big, Hunt, King, Tribute, and Madison, among others. It wasn't just a whim. Paul was working on his own business in secret from Art. He wasn't just making records of his own songs. He was writing and making movies for other people. He was making music for Doy Daniels, the Vevels, and Richie Cordell for Amy Records by 1962. In 1958, he put out his first song by himself as True Taylor. That means he was already making plans for his own job just a few months after Hey School became popular. The real harm was done when Sid Prozen went up to Paul and offered him solo deals without Art knowing. Paul didn't talk about it. Once Art found out, it broke him. He later said that the lie broke up their friendship. He never forgot about it. Art still had faith in them, and Paul was planning a way to get away. Tom and Jerry were having a hard time repeating their first hit, so that hurt a lot. Paul did not wait. He went on. Art didn't understand what was going on until it was too late. Things got worse when Paul did well without Art. Paul had a small hit with Motorcycle in 1962, when he was in a new band called Tycho and the Triumphs. It got to number 99 on the Billboard lists. He also put out The Lone Teen Ranger under the direction of Jerry Landis at the same time. Number 97 on the charts. Even though these were small wins, they showed Paul didn't need Art to do well. Paul's sneaky side came out in the Tycho and the Triumphs project, but the real face was another singer named Marty Cooper. Paul sang the lead on the hit song. He was pulling strings behind the scenes while still being himself as a single artist. This proved what Paul already thought. He was able to do it by himself. In that way, his earlier treachery seemed even more planned. He wasn't just adding to what he did. He took Art's place without telling him. They broke up in 1958. At the time, it wasn't exciting. They didn't do much, but the damage was big. It was 5 years before they saw each other again, in 1963. Paul put out more than 30 songs at that time under different names. Art also tried to make music. But he didn't get very far without Paul's help or drive. In 1963, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel didn't get back together because they missed each other. They were in a bad way. Paul was barely able to stay alive by 1963. He tried to sell songs to record companies over the phone for a living. Tom Wilson, who works for Columbia Records, liked one of his songs called "He Was My Brother." He didn't want Paul, though. He thought a British group would like the song. Paul did something brave. He talked Wilson into letting him and Art try out for a studio one time. They sang "The Sound of Silence." Wilson was shocked because he had worked with jazz greats like Miles Davis. He liked Art's clear voice and Paul's words. After that one test, they got a real job. They used their real names for the first time. Things were getting worse for them, though. Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m., their first record, was a complete failure. It came out in October 1964 and only 1,000 copies were sold in 8 months. All of a sudden, the folk sound they liked was out of style. There was no going back after the Beatles. Brazil tried to sell them as part of an old folk custom at the worst time possible. Review scores were low. The sales were not as good. The two broke up again. Paul left for England. He played in little clubs. He even made an album by himself there called the Paul Simon Song Book. Art stayed in New York and went back to Columbia University to study. Before they knew it, the songs Paul wrote while he was living alone in exile would become hits for them. Then something very strange took place. In 1965, producer Tom Wilson added electric guitars and drums to The Sound of Silence without telling the band. He did it right after Bob Dylan's work on Like a Rolling Stone. Not one person told him what to do. They didn't know. It worked after he just let go of it. Radio stations in Florida and Boston began playing the reworked version. A crazy way for Simon to find out was to read Billboard magazine while he was on tour in Denmark. It was the #1 song on January 1, 1966. Paul was shocked. In honor of the party, Art called Paul, but the remix shocked him. The changes in beat made him mad. It was still a hit. To ride the wave, they quickly got back together to make a new album. But now something was different. Paul wanted to be in charge by 1966. He took over everything while cutting parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. He was in charge of the tools. He was in charge of the sound. He worked on it for months. He wrote a lot of songs while he was in England. Most of the time, Garfunkel came to sing. That was it. A lot of people bought the record. It sold a lot of copies and got to #4 on the Billboard list. But Paul began to think of himself as the genius who made it all happen. Art was just the voice. Things would get even worse there. After that came The Graduate. In the 1967 movie, written by Mike Nichols, their music was used. It made them famous all over the world. The movie Mrs. Robinson wasn't even finished when it came out, but it was a huge hit. It got to #1 on the charts. Bookends, their next record, helped them stay at the top of the charts for 16 weeks. The Grammys gave them Record of the Year. But there were cracks in the progress. Paul thought that some people praised Art too much. People thought Art had written the songs. Even though Paul wrote it, Art was the one who got praise. It was best said by their boss. Each of them wished the other well. Even worse, Paul didn't feel safe. Paul would always remember the time Art made fun of him by saying, "I'll always be taller than you." That hurt for years. The last blow then came. They were asked to be in Catch-22 by Mike Nichols. They were both cast, but Paul's part was cut. There was only Art left in the movie. Paul felt ashamed. Art went to Mexico to make the movie. Paul stayed in New York. That breakup made everything very clear. Paul thought they would keep making music. Art was not there for months. It went on for a year instead of 6 weeks. Bridge Over Troubled Water, their album, had to be taped over 2 long days. One in November 1968 and another in December 1969. Paul waited and thought about it in between. We saw Woodstock come and go. They were unable to play. Art was still making movies. Even though Paul worked hard, things were never the same. Real-time comments had always been a big part of how they came up with ideas. I heard 2 voices in the same room. Paul was asked by Art to send tapes to Mexico. Art would come back with new ideas. He would say, "No, that part isn't good." Paul thought he was a junior worker. It was put down. Things were not meant to be this way. After Art said something, everything stopped. He told Paul, "This is how it will work, I'll make movies for 6 months, and when I come back, you'll have written the songs, and we'll make the album." Paul didn't say much in response. That's not going to happen. He didn't just say no to a plan. He was against the idea of being paid as a songwriter by someone. Paul had always made the music, run the sessions, and written the songs. Fans cheered for Art, though. People went crazy when Art sang "Bridge Over Troubled Water" live. Paul would stand in the background and think, "That's my song, man." It was quiet during the last few days of work on Bridge Over Troubled Water. Paul had the band and the producer all to himself. There was Art in Mexico. Everything for the title track was recorded in California to make it easy for Art to get there. But when it was Art's turn to sing, he did it by himself and got an applause. That record was their biggest hit and also their last. In 1970, Simon and Garfunkel broke up. Most people thought Paul Simon would get over it quickly. Bridge Over Troubled Water had just become a worldwide hit and had been at the top of the charts for 6 weeks in a row. Paul was scared, though. He took chances because he was afraid. In January 1972, he put out his first record by himself, which was just called Paul Simon. A chicken and egg dish on a menu gave them the idea for one of the songs, Mother and Child Reunion. The sound was what really made it interesting. Jimmy Cliff's band and Paul went to Kingston, Jamaica, to make reggae music. It worked. In both the US and the UK, the song made it to the top 5. Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard, another Paul song that made it to number 22, showed that he could still write songs that sounded like stories. It went to number 4 in the US and number 1 in the UK and Japan. Paul released There Goes Rhymin' Simon in 1973. His self-assurance was rising quickly. He tried out new music types and instruments. Photography was used in a smart way to talk about memory in the number 2 single Kodachrome. Then Loves Me Like a Rock came out and topped the Cashbox lists. He did something he had never done before, he got the gospel group Dixie Hummingbirds to sing background singing. American Tune wasn't a big hit, but it made people feel something. It used a melody from Bach and, in just a few lines, showed how sad the country was after Vietnam. Cashbox put that record at the top of the charts. After all these years, Paul finally put out Still Crazy 2 years later, in 1975. His darkest work so far. He had just split up with Peggy Harper, but they were a hit. The album won Album of the Year at the Grammys and went straight to number 1 on Billboard. Paul also got the award for Best Male Pop Vocal. 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover is the most popular song. In early 1976, it was number 1 for 3 weeks. You Can Find My Little Town on the same record. It was a surprise reunion with Art Garfunkel and it got to number 9. But Paul's home life wasn't stable at all. He married Princess Leia's wife, Carrie Fisher, in 1983. Their relationship moved quickly. They met during the Star Wars craze and fell in love right away, but getting married while he was on tour with Garfunkel was a terrible idea. Paul looked back on his marriage and said it was hard in a 2024 documentary. Carrie was always in the news. She knew what fame was. Paul didn't. The press was like a game to her, and Paul wasn't cut out for it. Even though they were only married for 11 months, it left a mark. Both were at the top of their careers. Paul was once more in the news. The movie business still loved Carrie. Sarah Michaels, Paul's best man, said the wedding felt like a storm. They were always surrounded by fame. Paul afterwards said that being in Carr's world made him tired. Her mood swings, her drug use, and her need to be in the public eye. It was all too much. He said he thought his life had turned into a show for the press. That emotional chaos got into Paul's songs. His 1983 album Hearts and Bones did not do well at the box office, even though reviews praised it. People did not connect with the songs at that time, even though they were deep, personal, and raw. It's clear now that he was falling apart on the inside. At the same time, the fame and wealth caused more troubles. They spent their marriage on private jets, in 5-star hotels, and in front of cameras all the time. Sarah Michaels said it was like being stuck in a dream. For Paul, though, it was more like a bad dream. And Carrie did very well in that world. Paul didn't. He felt fake, like he was pretending to stay alive. Paul changed after they broke up. Since he married Eddie Bickle in 1992, their life has been much calmer. They have 3 children. After that, he didn't show up in any papers. But Paul wasn't done with trouble. In 1985, he went to South Africa during the apartheid era. The UN took a strong stance against any culture exchange with the regime. Paul still went, though. He recorded with bands from Soweto for 9 days. They had to work during curfews and in fear of the cops. But Paul paid them $200 an hour, which is more than 3 times what they would have made in New York. People there only made $15 a day. But protesters were still very angry. The representative of Ghana to the UN said that Paul was supporting apartheid just by being there. There was quick backlash. After him, there were protests in London and Birmingham. Musicians spoke badly about him. There were also picket lines everywhere Paul went on tour with Graceland. Then there was another scandal. This one is about stealing. Steve Berlin of Los Lobos said Paul stole their song. Berlin told them that Paul showed up with nothing at all and asked them to jam at Graceland. Yes, they did. Paul used that song on his record later without giving them credit. After they spoke out, Berlin said Paul told them, "Sue me and see what happens." Paul denied that. Los Luz said they didn't get anything, though. Not a credit. There is no pay, and there is quiet. There were more credit disputes, mostly from artists from Africa. Others felt used while others supported Paul. Jazz great Jonas Gwangwa from South Africa said, "So it takes another white man to discover my people." That was a harsh truth. Many people thought Simon still had too much power even though he paid more than the going rate and promised rewards. Paul didn't give up. He said that the protest was the song itself. He didn't write political songs because he thought the message was in working together. It got worse when he said, "I didn't ask permission from the ANC." The ANC and the UN put him on a blacklist. He was told he couldn't go to South Africa and was charged with breaking foreign law. The UN took off his name in 1987, but the damage had already been done. Artists like Billy Bragg and Jerry Dammers still spoke out against Paul's return to London decades later. In 1975, there was a chance meeting that set everything off. Since their nasty breakup in 1970, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel hadn't talked much. They were recording with John Lennon and Harry Nilsson in Los Angeles, though, and they were back in the same room. It all made sense. The stress seemed to go away. It felt like old times for a moment. To give it another chance, they chose to be a pair again. It took them months to work on it that year. It seemed like they were looking for the magic that made them famous in the past. It didn't work, though. They worked hard, but all they had to show was one song, My Little Town. The song ended up on both of their solo records, not a joint one, which is funny. They seemed to want to get back together but couldn't even agree on how to share their one song. It was a sign of what was to come. Then there was a high point. They stood together in Central Park on September 19, 1981. There were more than 500,000 people there. The crowd was in every part of the big field. To get a better look, people sat on roofs and climbed trees. There was a lot of history at the show. HBO spent more than $1 million to show it. It sold 2 million copies of the live record. They raised $51,000 to help fix up the park that was falling apart. Old songs got to the top of the charts again. Everyone seemed to want them back. Things were beginning to break down behind the scenes, though. The hit led to a 1982 world tour. That should have been their big return. Instead, it showed how badly they didn't get along. They could no longer talk. Not just arguments, but silence as well. They would sing beautiful harmony every night, then leave the stage and go their different ways. It wasn't even like they were trying to get along. The music sounded like a group. The truth was cold. Before the trip, they tried to fix it. Words of truth, promises, and dreams. The cracks got worse when they hit the road, though. They couldn't even ride together. Fans saw the show, but behind the scenes, things were falling apart slowly. Things got even worse in 1983. An album called Think Too Much was being made. It was their first record since Bridge Over Troubled Water. Garfunkel recorded the voice for a number of songs. It was supposed to be a full Simon and Garfunkel album, but Paul changed his mind. He didn't tell Garfunkel that he thought the songs were too personal, especially the one about his friendship with Carrie Fisher. He took out Art's singing, re-recorded everything, and put out the solo with the new name Hearts and Bones. The Garfunkel was broken. He worked hard and was there the whole time, but then he was cut out. There was no talk or notice, it was just erased. In the end, he said it was a deception. After that, they stopped making songs together. There was one last chance in 2010. A tour for the return was set up. It turned into presupposed to kick off in New Orleans, but Garfunkel advanced vocal cord paralysis. He couldn't sing. The excursion turned into postponed, then cancelled. Simon did not take it well. He felt like Garfunkel hadn't been honest approximately how horrific it became. The agree with that turned into already skinny finally broke. Garfunkel apologized to enthusiasts, however the damage was performed. Even after he recovered, Simon did not want to hold. In 2015, Garfunkel lashed out. Garfunkel gave a brutal interview to The Telegraph. He called Simon a jerk and an idiot for on foot away after Bridge Over Troubled Water. He stated their friendship began in 1953 due to the fact he felt sorry for Simon's short height. Then came the road that hit hardest. That reimbursement gesture created a monster. It wasn't just imply, it was non-public and it harm. The interviewer asked if Simon had a Napoleon complicated. Garfunkel did not hesitate. I might say so. Yes. Coming from a lifelong pal, it turned into devastating. He even stated George Harrison once instructed him, "My Paul is to me what your Paul is to you." The Pauls sidelined us. It wasn't simply an insult. It became an evaluation to some other famous feud, and it made things worse. Simon stayed quiet at the start, however whilst he ultimately answered, he didn't keep lower back. In a 2016 interview, he said, "We do not get along. It's now not fun. No warmth, nostalgia, simply finality." He had moved on. By 2018, he was talking like a man on the quit of his avenue. "I'm completed," he stated. "I haven't written a new tune in multiple years." The vintage power turned into gone. Anything innovative fireplace they as soon as shared turned into now ash. After that, they didn't speak for nearly a decade. From 2015 to 2024, it became whole silence. Now not one call, no longer one email. Two old pals, now in their 70s and 80s, drifting in overall estrangement. That silence most effective broke by means of accident whilst Garfunkel ran into Simon's son, Harper, of their apartment constructing. It brought about a reunion lunch. Garfunkel asked, "What occurred? Why haven't we visible every other?" Simon spoke back quietly. "An antique interview. You stated a few stuff, at some stage in the one's quiet years, Simon faced struggles of his own. In 2023, he released 7 Psalms, a 33-minute acoustic album he known as his Maximum Private Paintings. However, in the back of that becomes something greater critical. He had misplaced nearly all hearing in his left ear. Simplest 6% remained. Medical doctors could not explain it. It passed off after a bad case of COVID-19 in 2022, which additionally left him bodily susceptible. He admitted he could not sing You May Call Me Al anymore. "It truly is gone," he said. "I cannot do this one." It turned into heartbreaking. A man who built his life around track now dropping the potential to perform it. In November 2024 on CBS Mornings, Simon said he felt angry, frustrated, trapped in silence, each in his ear and with the simplest character who had shared his rise to fame. A silence full of ignored probabilities, burned bridges, and a friendship that had once changed the arena. They'd commenced as two boys from Queens, singing into school microphones, dreaming of something larger. And that they had reached it. However, someplace along the way, the friendship fractured, the music stopped, and the silence grew louder than any concord they ever sang.